We're out here in the trail with all these giant bugs. This is our LS3 Jeep. You probably notice I'm going kind of easy on it. It's really tight, it's really clean. It's got these relatively small tires, so I don't like beating on things, especially things that aren't mine, so we're taking it real easy with this one. But it's running fabulous. Air conditioning's really cold. We got our battery tray in here. This one's got a powder coated air intake. It's an LS3, which unfortunately we're not doing so many of anymore. You can probably hear that Camaro fan. It's really not that much wound up. It's probably 40–50%. Got a K&N filter, standard coolant bottle. This is basically the same setup we used 8–9 years ago. Even that ECM bracket where you tuck it down inside there. It's a setup that we've done year after year. I don't know if you can hear me, but this is our aluminum billet drive that we've done now for about 6–7 years. This morning we are in a late model JK with an LS3 6L80. It's 2015, I think. This Jeep originally had a manual transmission. As you can see, it's been switched over to a bump shifter. On the manual transmission builds, and I get this question, can you do manual transmission builds? And we've been doing them for a long time. But as you can see, we light up the Prindle. We even have full current gear readout. And I'm bump shifting through the bump shifter right now. However, we do have the option of shifting through the cruise control switches. These switches, there's a switch on the Mocan that will allow you to either shift through the CAN bus like a cruise control switch signal, or a switch input like a toggle or rocker switch like GM does. It's fitting driving an LS3 to talk about the current status of V8s in this country, because this country has been going through a lot of craziness, which I really haven't experienced in my lifetime. And if you look at the original small block Chevy that came out in 1955, GM made that engine for almost 50 years. And the challenges now facing manufacturers has really been stepped up by the current administration. Most of us know that the current administration is trying to go clean energy and go electric. And we're just not there yet, according to a lot of experts, and that's my opinion too. If you think about it, most of the energy that comes for these electric cars, from what I understand, comes from natural gas and other petroleum-based products. So we're right back to step one. The cost of these electric cars is higher. I know that they're talking about giving some kickbacks and rebates, but really to buy the car and the longevity of the car, my niece just had to get rid of her Prius because the battery went bad and it was going to cost more than the car was worth to replace. So there's still a lot of issues facing electric cars. If we look at the performance side of it, electric cars perform very well. The Teslas are really quick, and in a Tesla with 27-inch tires and aerodynamics, you can get 300 miles on a charge, which is pretty good, because most of our Jeeps don't get 300 miles on a tank of gas. But now you try taking a 7,000 or 8,000 pound SUV like a Denali or an Escalade or a Jeep on 40s with 1,000 pounds of wheels and tires with the aerodynamics of a brick, and you try getting that to go 300 miles on a full charge. There's still a lot of challenges to go. We're making baby steps. There's electric trucks out there that are coming around, but we're just not there yet, in my opinion. So GM recognized a long time ago that Americans want V8s in their big SUV vehicles and their high-performance cars like their Corvettes and Camaros. And they're doing their best to meet that need. Now, the government is fighting them at every step, trying to force manufacturers to go electric. And if you take the full-size SUV market, myself included, we need that power of a V8. My Denali is very heavy, but it gets down the road, and it gets down the road in style. I can cruise at pretty much any speed I want. We are going to be towing a trailer, so we got the 6.2 Denali, and I can tell you, fully loaded down, that engine is enough. So GM knows this, and GM has really put a lot of effort into their V8 technology, like some of the other manufacturers has also, and we'll talk about the Hemi in a second. Some of the technologies that GM is using to keep the V8 viable is dynamic fuel management or active fuel management. That's multiple displacement technology. It's been around for a long, long time, all the way back to the 1980s that I know of. Stop-start. However, I'm told that there's going to be a pause in those technologies, that GM is actually not going to offer some of the full-size V8 vehicles with stop-start or multiple displacement technology because the lack of chips, the chip shortage. And again, whoever's to blame, whether it's our government or the suppliers, we have a serious supply chain issue. When GM came out with the small block in 1955, they pretty much had it in production for almost 50 years. Parts were always there. Engines were always there. I've never faced a market where things were so scarce. And one of the reasons that we have to keep moving around with these engines, and they're all good engines. It doesn't matter if you get an L82, an L83, an L84, an L87. They're all great engines. And we try to make a commitment to what engine we want to go with, but then the market changes. And in my opinion, again, Big Brother put a damper on production and the whole supply chain with the COVID restraints and taxes and all the administrative shackles that they've put on these companies has made it so difficult to jump through the hoops, and factories shut down, engines aren't available, prices have skyrocketed. GM has really put a lot of effort to keep their V8s viable. From what I understand, Ford is going to continue to support the V8 in their trucks and in the new Mustang, which is really good to hear. I think it's a different story with the Hemi, though. Everything I've been reading is that Chrysler intends to obsolete the Hemi in about 2023. That's next year. Chrysler has received a lot of criticism for not updating the Hemi for a long time. And the Hemi has a long and proud heritage. And this is what I know about it. Back in World War II, Chrysler, well, actually Dodge, were innovators. They always thought a little bit outside of the box and were coming out with technology, whether it was in the braking system or electronics, that was different and ahead of everybody else. Most of the other manufacturers were a little more conservative. They used known technology and mass-produced it, like Ford and then, of course, Chevrolet, who eventually took over Ford in the sales. But the Dodge brothers, DeSoto, they were innovative and they tried to think outside of the box. So during World War II, the Chrysler engineers developed some military engine, one for the Patton tank, and it used a hemispherical combustion chamber. Everybody knew that the lens-shaped combustion chamber was the way to go for efficiency, but they required the valves to be set up in a way that first they were overhead valves, and you got to remember at that time, flatheads were really popular because flatheads were easy to build, they were reliable, they were very low performance engines, but it was a known technology, and ever since Henry Ford came out with the flathead V8 in the 30s, it kind of became the standard. The flathead puts the valves in the engine block aiming up, and then you just basically bolt a flat plate on top of the block, and that's why they call it a flathead. And as you can imagine, that doesn't give you the best combustion chamber efficiency. So going to the overhead valve, like the small block Chevy, small block Fords, all that, was really the way to go. And the overhead valve high compression engines of the 50s is what started the muscle car revolution, and basically the high performance engine for everything from luxury cars to sports cars. Now there were high performance engines before that, but they were more limited, more exotic, more expensive. These were mass produced high performance engines. So Chrysler developed an engine for a tank and an engine for fighter aircraft, and I think it was the P-47 that they put it in, and it went 500 miles an hour and proved the technology. The problem was the war was over by the time that technology matured, and then of course we entered the jet age and the piston engine went to the sideline. But Chrysler didn't stop. They came out with their Hemi engine, including the 392, which you guys know about today, but it came in other cubic inch displacements. They used it in DeSotos and Dodges. They use it in generators for businesses. They pretty much use that engine for everything, like the small block Chevy. Chrysler got pretty serious in the 60s and updated the Hemi to the 426, which is now legendary. Most guys don't know, and I've owned a lot of 426 Hemis. The 426 Hemi out of the box really wasn't anything special. The carburetors were detuned, the timing, it didn't run as hard as a 440 Magnum, in my opinion. Forget about a 446 pack. That would take the Hemi all day long, as would a big block Chevy or some of the big block Fords. The Fords are really kind of hit and miss. I mean, the 427 side-loader was an awesome engine. The 428s were awesome engines, but the Midland, they were built more for emissions. And a lot of that technology actually got into the LS engine, but that's a different story. So the 426 Hemi was pretty cool. It was a hemispherical combustion chamber. GM did what they called the semi-Hemi on their big blocks, where they canted the valves a little bit. It definitely wasn't a Hemi. It was still just an overhead valve V8, but they did get a little bit of the benefit by canting those valves and improving combustion chamber efficiency. And the big block Chevy was a force to be reckoned with back in the muscle car era. So let's fast forward a few years. When the 70s hit and emissions and insurance and all that destroyed the muscle car era, Chrysler was still making these big land yachts, you know, the Poleras, and they had 383s, very inefficient engines. These engines were getting under 10 miles to the gallon. They tried improving them by the late 70s, early 80s. They went through their lean burn technology, and they had some pretty cool technology. But the problem was the gas crisis and everything else that was going on in the world made those old-fashioned big boats obsolete. So in comes Iacocca, who was really a wizard over at Ford. We have to rethink the market. And this is kind of what's going on today with Chrysler, if you think about it. Iacocca said, we got to get rid of these big boats that are not competitive, not getting good gas mileage. I owned a wrecking yard, and I remember seeing all these giant boats get dragged in. It was very sad, but even high-performance road runners. And I one time rescued a Ford Galaxy Thunderbolt, which I didn't even know what it was, but it looked so cool. I rescued it. It turned out it was a very special car from the crusher. Hemis were crushed. These things were just scrap metal. So the new thinking was, let's emulate what's successful. And what was successful? Well, the Japanese were getting really successful. Why? Because they were building very good cars with high technology engine. They were building overhead cam engines that were small displacement, 2 liter, 1.8 liter. They were getting very good gas mileage, 20 plus miles to the gallon, compared to the American cars getting almost half that. The quality of these imports was very good. In fact, they had to do import restrictions, I remember, in the 1980s, just to keep the Detroit companies alive. Chrysler, as you know, was going bankrupt and the government bailed them out. But this new deal that Iacocca came out with not only made Chrysler competitive again, but he paid the government back, which is pretty rare in today's world, and he came out with the K car. The K car was a big hit, of course. Now, in my opinion, it wasn't the best car, but it was a little 2.2 liter overhead valve. It had a timing belt, and it emulated what the Asians were doing. Now, we tried to do that previously with the Vega and the Pinto, and they had limited success. They sold a lot of them, but really Americans wanted those big V8 cars with the power. The attraction of the new Chrysler K cars was not only the fuel economy, but they had a LeBaron that was a convertible. One of the brightest moves ever by an automotive company was the Caravan. Chrysler came out with a minivan. Now, Chrysler had a minivan way back in the 1930s, kind of like a minivan. It was the Chrysler Airstream, I think. Even today, minivans are extremely popular. And Chrysler flourished, and then you guys know the story. They got bought by Mercedes, and I think Mercedes kind of took a bath on the deal because they injected a lot of technology into Chrysler, and they really didn't meet their goal, so they sold out. And FCA, if you think of Fiat and the Europeans that own Chrysler now, they have a different type of thinking than we do. In fact, they were thinking about axing the JK and going with a unibody, not a full frame, V6 or 4-cylinder turbo, something like the Liberty or the what is it, that new small thing, Renegade, I don't know what they call it, and making that the JK. And of course we didn't want that. You know, us Jeepers, we want a full frame, we want live axles, we want power and all that. So the JK has kind of been in la-la land. The Hemi JL, in my opinion, was really just a response or a reaction to the new Ford Bronco, and I think it's an awesome vehicle, and if you could pick one up, I would do it, and it's probably going to be a collector item in the future. But for the rest of us, getting these little V6s, while the Pentastar 8-speed is really good in a JL, the 4-speed 3.8 in a JK is horrible. Back in the day, in 2007, 8, 9, 10, whatever, there were some really serious guys into Jeep. I worked with a bunch of high-profile off-roaders, and these guys needed more power. That's all there was to it. You know, they put 40s on their Jeep, and they had to trailer them to the trail, and on the trail they weren't so bad, but you get the thing on the highway and forget about it. You were the clot in the nation's arteries. Chrysler brought the Hemi back and put them in their trucks and their Challengers and Chargers and everything else, and they're awesome cars. I really don't have anything bad to say about them. I actually own a bunch of Chrysler vehicles myself, including a Challenger TA, which I love. I had a Charger 500, a Superbird, a couple of Hemis. Now, Chrysler has been under a lot of criticism for not improving and updating the Hemi, like GM has updated their V8s, going all aluminum and direct injection, high compression. Ford also, you know, you look at the Coyote motor and some of the new technology Ford is coming out with, that's pretty awesome. And I gotta say that Ford and GM were always competitors and you were a Ford guy or a GM guy, but that line is getting obscured. If you look at some of the things that they're doing in common now, like the 10-speed transmission, and some of the LS technology came from the early Ford engines, in my opinion. Some of you might argue about that, but there's a lot of similarities. Ford and GM seem to be still carrying the torch. Now, from what I understand, Chrysler isn't. I'm told that FCA wants to phase out these big, inefficient, heavy V8s, and they don't want to put the money in to design a new one. But they have alternatives. They're going electric. I do believe the Charger and the Challenger are going to go electric next year. And that's pretty awesome, because electric vehicles, you're not going to really beat them in performance in these smaller vehicles, because electric motors basically have all their torque available from 0 RPM. And you know that's not true in an internal combustion engine. So performance-wise, these things are going to be pretty awesome. Now, in the bigger trucks, I think it's going to be a little bit different story. Chrysler obviously has the Pentastar, and Ford has the EcoBoost, and there's V6s out there, small displacement, smaller engines, and that's really what the Europeans have been big on. They've been big on small displacement engines with high technology, whether it's 4-valve technology, dual overhead cams, turbochargers, and I think that's the direction Chrysler's going to go in, because they got to step up or step out. The Hemi is a great engine, but it's really old technology. It's cast iron. Now, they did apply MDS, or multiple displacement technology, to the Hemi, but it's still not in the same league as some of the other V8s out there. So I think FCA is just thinking about axing the Hemi. Now, we don't know what's going to happen 20, 30, 40 years from now. And I tell my kids, you might be driving hydrogen-powered vehicles. Things like hydrogen that are renewable and readily available is energy that's out there. And yes, wind technology and all that, but there's so many issues right now with that type of technology. I just think in today's world, and GM has recognized this, GM is trying to stay with their V8s and their big SUVs. I just couldn't imagine my Denali loaded down with 8,000 pounds in a trailer going along with a 3-liter V6. So from what I understand, they're going to continue to offer the V8, and I heard that there's going to be a pause in the 6.2 L87 availability, because the availability of parts, GM can't get them, whether it's their plants shutting down or the supply chain. And it's going to come back, I think, later this year. But you know, you still got the 5.3, and they offer a diesel, so there's still other options. But the bottom line is, GM has recognized that families like me with 3 kids, we like these big vehicles, and we like to have enough power to do what we need to do on the highway. And I've been in vehicles that don't have the power, and it really is miserable. So we're going to take this late model JK LS3 up to the trail, and we're going to see you soon.